The morning haze hung thick over Charleston Air Force Base, a prelude to the storm that loomed on the horizon. The heavy scent of wet earth mixed with the sharp smell of gasoline and metal. A low hum from military vehicles filled the air, but the atmosphere was different today. It wasn't the usual rush of a base preparing for maneuvers. This was the quiet before storm, both the one outside and the one about to stir inside the base. Marissa stood at the gate, her weathered leather jacket the only sign that she didn't quite belong. Her deep silver hair, tied back in a simple ponytail, framed her face, and her faded jeans and work boots painted a picture of someone who had spent more time in hangars than boardrooms. She wasn't the polished military consultant they were used to, but there was something in the way she carried herself that made even the busiest officers take a second glance. Sergeant Alex, stationed at the gate, barely looked up from his clipboard. It wasn't uncommon to see contractors and consultants like her wandering in and out, all with their paperwork and badges. "Morning, ma'am. Purpose of your visit?" His tone was routine, devoid of any real interest. "I'm here to consult on C-17 maintenance issues," Marissa replied, her voice calm and assured. It was clear she had dealt with this 1,000 times before, despite the fact that she wasn't a typical consultant. Sergeant Alex glanced at the credentials she handed over, barely reading them. He had no idea that what he was holding wasn't just a simple consultant badge. It was the tip of an iceberg, covering a deep and carefully concealed history of a woman whose skills went far beyond any civilian job title. He stamped her visitor badge with a quick motion and handed it back. "Visitor badge is good for 8 hours, ma'am. Report to Building 7 for escort assignment. We're expecting bad weather, so stay sharp." Marissa clipped the badge to her jacket and nodded. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the surroundings. She'd been here before, years ago. Only back then, her role had been far more significant than it appeared now. She'd once been a part of classified military programs, a test pilot who had pushed the limits of aviation. Now, she was just another consultant, no one the wiser to her real expertise. As she walked toward Building 7, the massive C-17 aircrafts loomed over her, resting like giants waiting for battle. The base, preparing for the oncoming storm, buzzed with activity, but there was something beneath the surface. Marissa had a hunch about the real mission here, and it wasn't just about fixing old equipment. There was a deeper problem she had to solve. The base was bracing for Hurricane Delilah, and the weather reports weren't pretty. The storm was intensifying, and everything seemed to be moving faster than anticipated. In moments like these, everything depended on perfect coordination and preparation. But Marissa had an unsettling feeling about the way the base was maintaining its aircraft. The C-17S might be huge, state-of-the-art machines, but she had seen the signs. Shoddy maintenance, shortcuts, and ignored protocols that could have deadly consequences. As she entered Building 7, she was met by Master Sergeant Alex, a seasoned technician with years of experience in heavy cargo aircraft. His flight suit, embroidered with patches of achievement, told the story of his own career. But his skeptical gaze was clear. He eyed her up and down, not quite sure what to make of this civilian consultant. "You must be the one they send about the maintenance issues," Master Sergeant Alex said, his tone a mix of professionalism and barely concealed irritation. "I have to tell you, ma'am, these aren't vintage systems. The C-17 is the most advanced cargo aircraft in the world, and our maintenance procedures follow cutting-edge protocols." Marissa nodded, her demeanor calm, but her mind already working. She could see the cracks forming. His defensive tone told her more than he realized. He wasn't just defending the aircraft's readiness. He was hiding something. "I appreciate your expertise, Sergeant. I'm just here to offer a second opinion on some specific technical concerns that have been raised," Marissa replied, her voice soft but confident. She wasn't there to step on toes. She was there to uncover the truth. As they walked toward the maintenance bay, Marissa's sharp eyes quickly cataloged every detail. She had been around aircraft her entire life, and she knew what she was looking for. The C-17 sitting in front of her, looking pristine on the outside, was hiding a dirty secret. The maintenance log was full of discrepancies. Missing parts, improperly installed safety components, and stress fractures in vital areas that had been concealed under quick fixes. Marissa had seen these signs before. She had seen them in her own son's aircraft. The same aircraft that had gone down, killing David, her only child, just months earlier. The official reports had called it an unforeseeable equipment failure. But Marissa knew better. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern of negligence that had cost her son's life. And now, it was threatening the lives of others. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The storm outside wasn't the only danger approaching. The real storm was already here, hidden beneath layers of military bureaucracy and ignored safety protocols. Marissa had one choice: uncover the truth, or let more lives be sacrificed to the same system that had taken her son. The storm was coming fast. Outside, the wind began to pick up, howling like a beast trying to break free. But inside the operations center, there was a different kind of tension, a silent urgency hanging in the air. General Hayes stood at the front of the room, her face grim as she read through the latest weather updates on her tablet. The hurricane was intensifying, and there wasn't much time left to evacuate personnel and equipment. Hurricane Delilah is moving faster than expected. We have a small window before conditions become impossible, she said, her voice sharp, carrying the weight of authority. We need to move those units now. Marissa stood off to the side, observing quietly. She had seen this kind of chaos before, but this time her role was different. The aircraft, the lives in danger, the decisions being made, they were all being affected by something far more dangerous than the storm. It was the lack of proper maintenance, a problem she had to expose. As General Hayes continued to coordinate with her staff, Sergeant Alex approached Marissa with a sense of urgency. The plan is set. We're launching in 30 minutes. We have the C-17 ready, and we'll be flying out the 60 personnel along with 12 tanks. The mission is critical. If we don't get them out, the entire operation is at risk. Marissa's heart sank as she realized the aircraft they planned to use was the same one she had inspected earlier. It was barely airworthy. Marissa could already hear the engines groaning in her mind, feel the stress fractures in the wings, and the misaligned torque in the engines. The plane wasn't ready, and flying it into a hurricane was asking for disaster. She moved forward, stepping into the center of the room, where Major Daniel stood, confidently rallying his crew. We've flown through storms before. This is nothing we can't handle. The C-17 is built for this. Marissa couldn't keep silent any longer. She knew what was at stake. It wasn't just a matter of weather. It was a matter of life and death. That aircraft isn't ready to fly, she said, her voice cutting through the room. Her words landed with a heavy thud, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Major Daniel turned to her, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. You're a consultant, not a pilot. You're telling me the C-17 can't fly through a storm? I'm telling you that aircraft is not safe. You can't fly it through hurricane-force winds, Marissa responded, her voice unwavering. You need to ground it. Laughter erupted from the group of pilots and technicians around her. Major Daniel let out a sharp laugh, the sound echoing through the room. Ma'am, this is a C-17 we're talking about, not some small plane you can just park in a hangar. This machine is built to withstand storms, and our crew is ready to fly it. But Marissa didn't flinch. She had seen the damage, the shortcuts that had been taken to meet deadlines, and she knew that flying this plane would end in catastrophe. The patterns she had identified in the maintenance logs, the missing safety components, the cracks in structure, they all pointed to a disaster waiting to happen. You don't understand, Marissa said, her voice low but filled with authority. This isn't about the plane's capability. It's about the integrity of the maintenance. You're not just risking the lives of the crew. You're risking every single person on that mission. The room fell silent as General Hayes stepped forward, her face etched with concern. What exactly are you saying, ma'am? Marissa turned to face her. The C-17 you're planning to use has failed its basic safety checks. It's not ready to fly. And if you take it into the storm, you won't just be risking your crew. You'll be sending them to their deaths. The tension in the room was palpable, but General Hayes stood still, her gaze fixed on Marissa. You're suggesting we pull the aircraft? In the middle of a storm? Yes, Marissa replied, her eyes steady. It's your only choice. You don't want to be responsible for the lives that are lost because of this negligence. There was a long pause, a moment where the weight of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud itself. Major Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but General Hayes raised her hand to silence him. She turned back to Marissa, her voice calm but firm. If we don't fly, we risk losing the personnel and equipment. And if we do fly, we risk the mission and possibly the entire base. Marissa's mind raced as she took a step closer to General Hayes. I've seen it before. I lost my son because someone made a decision like this. He flew a plane that shouldn't have been in the air, and it cost him his life. I won't stand by and let the same thing happen again. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Major Daniel's defiant expression slowly shifted to one of uncertainty as he processed what Marissa was saying. The other officers looked at each other, unsure of how to proceed. General Hayes stood still, considering Marissa's words, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Finally, General Hayes spoke, her voice steady but heavy with the burden of command. We have no choice. Marissa, if you believe this aircraft is unsafe, then I'll listen to you. I'll ground it. Marissa nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. This wasn't over yet, but it was a victory for now. However, she knew the real challenge was coming. She had to make sure that the aircraft didn't just sit idle. It had to be inspected thoroughly, the faults fixed before anyone could fly it again. But there was no time to waste. The storm was still coming, and the men and women stranded at their post were relying on them to make the right decision. Marissa turned to Sergeant Alex. We need to check every aircraft on this base. Right now, every one of them. The wind outside howled, its voice echoing through the base like a warning, but inside the operations center, the air was thick with decisions. The base had shifted into emergency mode, but Marissa knew that the real emergency wasn't just the storm. It was the systematic failure she had uncovered in the aircraft maintenance. And it was now her responsibility to ensure that nothing more was missed. General Hayes looked at Marissa, her expression now more resolute. I want a full report on all aircraft, and I need it yesterday. Take Sergeant Alex with you, and make sure everything is checked. No shortcuts this time. Sergeant Alex nodded, clearly uncomfortable but willing to follow orders. Marissa had just done something that most military personnel wouldn't dare challenge, and now they were all looking to her for answers. We'll need to start with the C-17 and move from there. Every aircraft has to be inspected thoroughly, Marissa said, her mind already racing. The adrenaline was starting to pump, and the fire inside her that had been stoked by the loss of her son was burning bright. The hangar was quiet as they entered, the large C-17s looming like silent giants, their vast wings spread wide. The air inside the maintenance bay was musty, filled with the scent of grease, rubber, and metal. It was a familiar environment for Marissa, an environment where she had once thrived. But today it felt different. Today, every sound, every hum of machinery was tinged with the fear of what they might find. As they approached the C-17, Marissa felt her pulse quicken. She could already see signs of neglect. The gaps in the maintenance logs, the hurried repairs, the subtle cracks in the aircraft's fuselage that were almost invisible to anyone but someone with her experience. The stress fractures that were concealed, covered up by cosmetic fixes meant to keep up appearances. This one's been rushed, Marissa muttered, more to herself than to Sergeant Alex. Look at the stabilizer here. It's been patched, but it's still vulnerable. Sergeant Alex bent down, squinting at the area she pointed to. He couldn't see it. Not yet, but he knew Marissa had been in the game long enough to trust her instincts. He straightened up and looked at her, his face set in a frown. How bad is it? Worse than you think, she said, her voice low. These repairs won't hold. We need to get it grounded for a complete inspection, or this plane won't make it through the storm. Sergeant Alex looked at her for a long moment, his skepticism still hanging in the air, but something in her eyes told him she was right. His shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. All right, what now? Now, Marissa said, her voice steady. We checked the rest of the fleet. They worked in silence, moving from one aircraft to another. Marissa inspected each C-17 with the precision of a surgeon, pointing out cracks, missing safety features, and overlooked maintenance issues that others had let slip. Every aircraft on the base seemed to carry the same flaws, the same signs of neglect. The maintenance logs were a series of lies, filled with checked-off boxes and signatures from officers who were too busy or too lazy to look deeper. It wasn't long before Sergeant Alex was visibly shaken. He had always prided himself on his ability to spot problems, but Marissa had a depth of knowledge he couldn't match. Every aircraft they checked revealed more and more issues that would have put everyone at risk. We need to pull everything off the runway. I'm grounding these planes until further notice, Marissa said, her voice carrying the weight of command she didn't take lightly. Grounding them all? Sergeant Alex asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Yes, Marissa replied firmly. We can't afford any more mistakes. If we keep flying these planes, we're playing with fire. The storm outside intensified, but inside, the real storm was building. The military personnel were beginning to understand the severity of the situation. They'd been pushing these planes beyond their limits, and now it was time to face the consequences of that. As they continued their inspections, Marissa's mind flashed back to the day her son, David, had died. The official report had told her it was an unforeseeable equipment failure. But Marissa knew better. The maintenance logs from his plane had been doctored just like these. The aircraft had been cleared to fly even though it wasn't fit for duty. And it had cost her everything. She couldn't let that happen again. Not to anyone else. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the base, Marissa and Sergeant Alex were exhausted, but they had one last aircraft to inspect, the one that would be responsible for evacuating the stranded personnel and equipment. General Hayes met them at the hangar, her face tight with worry. What's the verdict? She asked, her eyes darting between Marissa and Sergeant Alex. It's worse than we thought, Marissa said, her voice unwavering. I recommend grounding every single aircraft on this base. We have major issues with the maintenance. If we keep pushing these planes, we're going to lose people. General Hayes took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the decision. This is bigger than I thought. We need those planes, but I can't risk sending anyone up if they're not safe. We'll cancel the mission for now. As she turned to leave, Marissa felt a deep sense of relief mixed with dread. The storm outside had nothing on the one brewing within the military system. But for now, she had done what she could. The battle was just beginning, and Marissa knew the next step would be even harder. The base was quiet now, the usual hum of military operations drowned out by the rising wind. The hurricane was no longer a distant threat. It was a force that was moving closer with every passing minute. But inside the base, Marissa was more focused on the storm that was far more dangerous than the one outside, the storm of negligence and corruption that she had just begun to uncover. General Hayes had made the call to ground the aircraft for the moment, but Marissa knew the real challenge was ahead. The military was not used to being told they were wrong. Not like this. And Marissa, though a hero in her own right, was about to become a target for the very people who had allowed this to happen in the first place. She sat in a dimly lit room inside Building 7, papers spread out before her, detailing each and every flaw she had uncovered in the fleet's maintenance logs. The storm outside beat against the windows, its relentless pounding mirroring the pounding in her chest. Her mind raced as she looked at the evidence, the pages filled with signatures, approvals, and hidden flaws that should never have been allowed to go unchecked. Sergeant Alex entered the room, his face drawn. I've been through all the records, Marissa. You were right. Every single aircraft we checked, they all have problems. Things that should have been caught during routine inspections. Marissa's eyes flickered over the papers once more, her mind already shifting to the next steps. It's not just the planes. It's the system that's broken. Whoever's been in charge of these inspections has been cutting corners to meet deadlines that don't take safety into account. She paused, her throat tightening. That's what killed David. It wasn't an accident. It was negligence. And now, it's happening all over again. Alex's face softened, and for a moment, His skepticism about her faded. "What do we do next?" he asked quietly. "We push for accountability," Marissa said, her voice sharp and resolute. "We go straight to the top. We can't let this go any further." But Marissa knew it wouldn't be easy. The military wasn't known for admitting failure, especially when the stakes were this high. If she was going to expose this, she would need more than just the evidence she had collected. She would need allies, people who could back her up when the inevitable pushback came. That's when the phone rang. General Hayes's voice came through, calm but filled with the weight of leadership. "Marissa, I need you in the operations center. Now." Marissa stood up immediately, her heart pounding. She didn't know what was coming, but she had a feeling it wouldn't be good. "On my way," she said, hanging up the phone. As she made her way to the operations center, the intensity of the storm outside seemed to grow, as though it were in perfect sync with the tension inside the base. By the time she entered the room, General Hayes and several other high-ranking officers were already gathered around a large table, their faces grim. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. "Marissa," General Hayes greeted her, her voice tinged with something Marissa couldn't quite place. Was it respect or was something else? "We've received orders from higher up. They're not happy with our grounding the aircraft. They want the mission to proceed." Marissa's stomach twisted. She had been expecting this, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. "But the planes aren't safe," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "We can't send them into a storm like that." "I know," General Hayes replied, her expression softening for a moment. "But you know how it works. We need to act quickly. The mission's importance is being overshadowed by our concerns over maintenance. We have to balance the immediate danger with the long-term risks." Marissa felt a deep surge of frustration. The lives of the personnel, the safety of the aircraft, everything she had been working to protect seemed to be hanging in the balance. "If we go forward with this mission, people will die," she said, her voice lower now, filled with the conviction she had kept inside all this time. "This isn't just about keeping schedules. This is about saving lives." A senior officer, Colonel Richards, looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and impatience. "This is bigger than just one mission, Marissa. We can't ground everything indefinitely. We'll lose operational credibility, and we won't be able to respond to future threats if we can't meet the needs of our people." Marissa stepped forward, her gaze hardening. "You're willing to risk those lives, to continue operating under the same system that led to David's death, all because of some vague notion of credibility?" The room fell into silence, the weight of her words sinking in. General Hayes shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "We've already committed to evacuating those personnel. The storm is moving fast. We don't have the luxury of time to make another call. We have to fly." Marissa took a deep breath. She had expected resistance, but this was worse than she had anticipated. General Hayes seemed to be caught between doing what was right and what was necessary, but what was necessary, in this case, would lead to disaster. "We're making a terrible mistake," Marissa said, the fire of conviction rising inside her. "I can't be part of this." Colonel Richard scoffed. "Then maybe you're not cut out for this job, Marissa." But just as the words left his mouth, General Hayes raised her hand, signaling him to stop. Marissa could feel the tension shift in the room. The eyes of every officer were now on her, waiting for her to make her next move. And in that moment, Marissa knew what she had to do. She couldn't sit back and watch another tragedy unfold. Not after everything she had already seen, not after David. She had already exposed the corruption, but now she would have to take a stand, not just as a consultant, but as someone with the power to make the right decision. "General," Marissa said, her voice resolute, "if you want to fly, then I'm grounding these planes. I'm making a public report on everything I've found, and I'll make sure it goes up the chain. This cannot continue." The room was silent. General Hayes looked at Marissa, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. She was in charge here, and Marissa knew she had just crossed a line. But it was the right line to cross. "Do what you have to do," General Hayes said, her voice low but filled with the weight of leadership. "But if you do this, you're going to be on your own." The silence in the room was deafening as Marissa's words hung in the air. The decision had been made. She wasn't going to stand idly by and allow the same mistakes that led to her son's death to continue claiming more lives. This time, she would fight for what was right, even if it meant standing alone. General Hayes stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding. If that's how you feel, then you'll have to take responsibility for this. We're at a breaking point, Marissa. The storm is on us. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. I can't promise you anything after this. Marissa felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just about the aircraft anymore. It was about everything. Her son's death had been a catalyst for change, and now she was in a position where she could make a difference. But the stakes were higher than ever. She turned to Sergeant Alex, who had been standing silently at the back of the room, watching her. His face was a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you with me, Sergeant?" Alex hesitated for a moment, clearly torn. But then he nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching in determination. "I'm with you, Marissa. Let's fix this." Marissa didn't smile. There was no joy in what she was about to do. She knew that taking a stand like this would cost her. She had already started the wheels of change, but now it was time to push it to the next level. There was no turning back. As the storm outside raged on, Marissa and Sergeant Alex worked quickly to draft a report that would outline all the maintenance failures they had uncovered. They documented everything in painstaking detail. Every crack in the aircraft, every shortcut that had been taken, every decision made with the lives of the military personnel on the line. They didn't just want to expose the truth. They wanted to ensure that it couldn't be ignored again. By the time they finished, the report was thick with evidence, a damning indictment of the system that had allowed these failures to happen. But Marissa knew that writing the report was just the first step. Getting it into the right hands would be the real battle. She had already made enemies, and now she was about to make a few more. With the report in hand, Marissa headed to General Hayes' office. The air was tense, heavy with anticipation as she entered. General Hayes was seated behind her desk, the storm outside visible through the large windows. She looked up as Marissa walked in, her expression unreadable. "You're sure about this?" General Hayes asked, her voice low but filled with an underlying sense of respect. Marissa didn't flinch. "I'm sure. I'm not letting this happen again." General Hayes nodded slowly, her fingers tapping on the desk in thought. "This will change everything. There will be consequences for all of us. You understand that, right?" "I understand," Marissa replied. "But the consequences of letting this slide are worse." The two women locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. General Hayes stood, walked to the side of the room, and picked up the phone. "I'll get it in the hands of the right people. You've made your choice. Now we'll see if anyone has the guts to do something about it." Marissa took a deep breath as she watched General Hayes make the call. This wasn't just a fight for her. It was a fight for every person who had been put in harm's way by the negligence of the military system. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They were up against powerful people who would do whatever it took to cover up their mistakes. As General Hayes finished the call and turned back to face her, Marissa knew that the battle was just beginning. But she was ready. She had to be. She wasn't going to back down now. With the report in motion, Marissa and Sergeant Alex went to the hangars to finalize their inspections. They worked quickly, making sure that everything was in place to prevent any more aircraft from taking off. The storm outside continued to worsen, but inside the base, it felt like the calm before an even bigger storm. As they prepared for the final inspection of the C-17, Marissa couldn't help but think of David, the young man who had once looked up at her with pride and admiration, who had flown under her tutelage. The son she had lost. She could feel the weight of his memory with every decision she made. This was for him. This was for everyone who had ever been hurt by a broken system. But as she walked into the hangar, ready to check one last plane before the storm hit, she knew this wasn't just about personal loss anymore. This was about justice. And no storm, no matter how fierce, was going to stop her from getting it. The storm outside had reached its peak. The wind whipped through the base, rattling windows and shaking the walls of the buildings. It was as if nature itself was pushing against the military's decisions, forcing them to face the consequences of their actions. The hurricane was relentless, But Marissa knew that it was nothing compared to the storm she had unleashed by exposing the flaws in the system. Sergeant Alex followed her through the hangar, their footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor. The C-17, the aircraft that would have been sent into the heart of the storm, loomed ahead like a sleeping giant. Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that the plane itself was waiting, just like the others, for the inevitable collision between the truth and the lies that had kept it flying for far too long. She paused in front of the plane, her gaze sweeping over its massive structure. The cargo bay doors were sealed tight, but Marissa could almost feel the weight of the equipment inside, the heavy tanks that were meant to be evacuated from the forward base. Each one of those tanks represented a life at risk, human lives, soldiers' lives. And none of them knew that the very aircraft they were counting on was filled with hidden flaws. Sergeant Alex stopped next to her, wiping the sweat from his brow. "This is it," he said quietly. "The last inspection. What happens now?" Marissa didn't answer right away. Her mind was working a mile a minute. They had already done everything they could to expose the issues, but it wasn't enough yet. The report was in the hands of higher-ups. But Marissa knew that simply identifying the problems wasn't going to change anything. She needed to prove beyond a doubt that these planes were unsafe, and she needed to act fast. The storm was getting worse by the minute, and time was running out. "Now, we make sure this never happens again," she said, her voice filled with resolve. She turned to face Sergeant Alex. "I need you to take the lead on this. I'm going to the command center to make sure they're taking this seriously. I want you to stay here, keep checking the planes, and make sure none of them take off. Not until we get the go-ahead to fix everything." Alex nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Got it, Marissa. I'll keep them grounded." With that, Marissa headed to the command center, where the real battle was about to take place. General Hayes had made her move, but Marissa knew that the powers that be were not going to let this slide easily. They would fight back, and they would do whatever it took to protect their own interests. Marissa was prepared for that. She had already been through too much to turn back now. As she entered the command center, the atmosphere was thick with urgency. Officers and technicians moved quickly, coordinating the last-minute preparations for the evacuation. The storm's full force was now hitting the base, and every minute counted. General Hayes looked up from the operations table as Marissa entered, her presence immediately shifting the room's energy. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew that Marissa had just brought the base to a standstill by grounding the aircraft, and now they were facing the consequences of those actions. "Marissa," General Hayes greeted her, her voice strained. "We've received the report. It's a mess." Marissa didn't waste any time. "I'm not here to sugarcoat it. The planes aren't safe. You need to cancel the mission and delay the evacuation until we've done the proper repairs." There was a heavy pause before General Hayes spoke again. "You've put us in a very difficult position. We can't afford to lose the personnel and equipment in the field. If we don't evacuate now, the tanks will be lost, and so will those 60 people." "Understand the urgency," Marissa replied, her voice calm but firm. "But I'm telling you, General, if we send those planes up now, you'll be putting those men and women at even greater risk. I'm not just talking about the equipment. I'm talking about the lives at stake. You've seen the maintenance records. You know what I found. You can't ignore this." General Hayes clenched her jaw, clearly torn between the safety of her people and the cold, hard facts that Marissa had laid out in her report. "I can't just cancel the mission without causing a complete breakdown of trust. We're already on the edge of failure here. If I make that call, I risk losing everything." Marissa stepped forward, her eyes locked on General Hayes. "Then make the right call. You owe it to them. You owe it to the people who will die if this continues. If we keep ignoring these issues, it's not just the planes we lose, it's the people who fly them." The room went quiet as everyone took in Marissa's words. General Hayes stood frozen for a moment, her mind clearly racing through the options. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but determined. "All right, Marissa, I'll ground the planes. But you need to make sure we have a plan to fix this. I can't keep delaying missions, especially not when lives are on the line." Marissa nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. But the battle was far from over. "I'll get started on the repairs right away. We can't let this go any longer. We'll do what we can to fix it, but it's going to take time." With that, Marissa turned to leave, but not before General Hayes stopped her. "Thank you, Marissa," General Hayes said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of military service. "I didn't know how far you were willing to go, but now I see it." Marissa nodded, her expression steely. "I've seen too much to back down now." As she left the command center, Marissa knew that her fight was only beginning. The C-17s weren't just planes. They were symbols of a broken system. And until the military fixed it, she would keep fighting. For David, for the lives of those soldiers, and for everyone who had ever been hurt by the same corruption she had uncovered. The air was thick with the weight of decisions that had been made, and the storm outside mirrored the one inside Marissa's mind. She had grounded the aircraft, but she knew the fight wasn't over. The hardest part had just begun. She needed to get to work, not just on fixing the planes, but on fixing a system that had allowed people to die in the name of bureaucracy and false deadlines. Sergeant Alex was already hard at work when Marissa returned to the hangar. He was going through the checklists, marking each issue she had uncovered earlier. Marissa couldn't help but notice the weariness in his eyes. He had seen the truth just as clearly as she had. The maintenance failures were systemic, and there were no easy fixes. "You're right about everything," Alex said without looking up. "The planes are a mess. I didn't want to believe it when you first pointed it out, but now that I've seen it, I can't ignore it anymore. This isn't just a few mistakes." Marissa didn't respond immediately. She couldn't shake the images of her son, David, from her mind, the young pilot, full of potential, who had trusted the system that had failed him. The memories of that day were still too fresh, the pain too raw. "I know," she finally said, her voice tinged with a quiet sadness. "But we can't keep ignoring this. We fix it one step at a time." They moved through the hangar together, inspecting every aircraft, carefully cataloging each issue that needed to be addressed. It was clear that Marissa was the only one who knew what to look for. Each dent, each crack, each missing safety component. She pointed them all out with the precision of someone who had spent years on the front lines of aircraft maintenance. But it wasn't just about the machines anymore. It was about justice and the lives that hung in the balance. By the time they finished their inspection, it was late afternoon. The winds had calmed for a moment, but the storm was still closing in. Marissa stood in front of the aircraft, taking one last look. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on her chest. "Get the word out," she said to Sergeant Alex, her voice low but filled with conviction. "No one flies until these issues are fixed. This doesn't end until we make sure these planes are safe." Alex nodded, his expression one of firm agreement. "Understood. I'll make sure no one goes near them until we get everything sorted out." As he moved off to organize the team, Marissa stepped back and took a deep breath. She knew that this wasn't just a simple matter of grounding a few planes. This was a fight to the finish. The military was a powerful machine, and it didn't take kindly to being exposed for its flaws. But Marissa had already lost too much to turn back now. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Marissa coordinated with the engineers, mechanics, and higher-ups, pushing for the repairs to start immediately. The evidence was undeniable. The planes were unsafe, and the military couldn't afford to risk more lives. But as the repairs began, the underlying tension in the air was impossible to ignore. The storm outside had intensified again, and now the mission was even more urgent. At the command center, General Hayes received an update. The evacuation mission was still on hold, but it was clear that pressure was mounting from above. Higher command was not happy with the delay, and they were pushing hard for answers. Marissa's report had triggered a cascade of actions, but now the military was at a crossroads. Would they fix the problem, or would they push ahead, risking everything? General Hayes's phone rang, the sharp tone cutting through the silence of the room. She picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she listened. After a few moments, she hung up and turned to Marissa, who was standing in the doorway, watching her. "The higher-ups want us to move forward," General Hayes said, her voice tight. "They're pressuring us to get the mission back on track. They want those planes in the air, and they want them flying out within the hour." Marissa stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing the words out loud made everything feel that much more real. "You can't fly those planes. They're not ready." "I know," General Hayes said, her voice filled with frustration. "But we don't have a choice. We can't afford to miss this window. If we don't act now, those people out there will be stranded, and worse, the equipment will be lost. The mission has to proceed." Marissa shook her head, the weight of her decision hanging heavily on her shoulders. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about saving equipment. It's about saving lives." General Hayes stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing the decision in her mind. Then she nodded, her expression tight. "I'll buy you some time, but you need to fix this, Marissa. You need to prove that these planes are safe, or we're going to lose everything." With that, General Hayes turned back to the command table, issuing orders to the team. Marissa could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her. Time was running out, and if they didn't act quickly, the consequences would be catastrophic. Marissa spent the next few hours working nonstop with the engineering team, overseeing the necessary repairs and rechecking every inch of the aircraft. The hangar was alive with the sound of tools and machinery, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Everyone knew the stakes. They had to get it right, or it would cost lives. By the time the repairs were finished, the storm had reached its peak. The winds outside howled, and the sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds. The C-17 was ready, or as ready as it could be. The maintenance team had worked tirelessly, but Marissa still wasn't sure it was enough. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, one misstep away for disaster. As the last check was completed, Sergeant Alex approached her, his face grim. "Everything's been fixed, but I don't know if it's enough. The storm's about to hit full force. Are we really sending them out there?" Marissa looked at the plane one last time. She had done everything she could. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they could manage under the circumstances. "We send them," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "But we make sure they're ready for what's coming." And with that, the C-17 taxied toward the runway, its engines roaring to life. The wind screamed outside, as if trying to tear everything apart, but the C-17 remained undeterred, its engines humming steadily as it lined up on the runway. Marissa stood at the command center, watching the plane through the large glass windows. She could feel her heart beating in her chest, every second dragging on as she wondered whether they had done enough to ensure the aircraft's safety. Behind her, General Hayes and the others were preparing for the mission's final launch. The storm was relentless, and the pressure to send the plane into the hurricane's path was overwhelming. But Marissa had already made her decision. She wouldn't back down. If this plane was going to fly, she had done everything in her power to make it as safe as possible. The room was quiet except for the sound of the radio crackling. Marissa turned to the team as the countdown began. "Keep me updated on the aircraft status," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have room for any mistakes." As she spoke, the plane began to move, its large frame rumbling as it accelerated down the runway. Marissa felt her breath catch in her throat. This was it. There was no turning back now. Major Daniel's voice crackled over the intercom. "Charleston Tower, this is Thunder 7. We're airborne, heading for landing zone Alpha. Visibility is poor, but we're holding steady." The communication was clipped, professional, but Marissa could hear the tension in his voice. It was one thing to prepare for a storm. It was another to be in the thick of it. As the aircraft climbed into the storm clouds, Marissa watched the radar with a watchful eye. The storm's intensity had exceeded predictions, and now the real test was unfolding. General Hayes approached her, her face filled with the quiet determination of someone who understood the gravity of the situation. "How long until they reach the landing zone?" General Hayes asked. "At least another 45 minutes, Marissa replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. "But if they're hitting turbulence this early, we'll have to reassess. We can't afford to push them past their limits." The seconds felt like hours as the storm continued to rage. Every update from the cockpit seemed to bring more bad news. The plane was struggling against the wind, and the visibility was quickly deteriorating. Marissa felt the tightness in her chest increase with each passing moment. She had done everything she could to prepare the aircraft, but there was only so much she could control. Then, a new report came through from the plane. Major Daniel's voice was strained, but he held it together as best he could. Charleston Tower, Thunder 7. We're encountering extreme turbulence. The cargo's shifting. We're having trouble keeping the aircraft steady. Requesting permission to abort the mission and return to base. The words hit Marissa like a punch to the gut. She knew the stakes. The equipment, the personnel, they were all at risk. But if they turned back, there was a chance they wouldn't make it back to safety. The storm was closing in, and the window of opportunity was closing with it. General Hayes turned to Marissa, her expression unreadable. What do we do now? Marissa stood still, her mind racing. She had been here before, testing aircraft in conditions that most pilots wouldn't dare fly through. This wasn't just about equipment anymore. It was about people's lives, the lives of those soldiers and the crew aboard the C-17. We don't turn back, Marissa said finally, her voice steady. We push forward. We've trained for this, and they've trained for this. We can't afford to lose those men out there. The decision was made, and the team sprang into action. Communication shifted to emergency protocols as Marissa oversaw the coordination between the flight crew and the ground team. There was no room for hesitation now. The storm outside intensified. The aircraft fought against the gusting winds and thick sheets of rain that slammed into it like a wall. The C-17, despite all the flaws and damage Marissa had uncovered, still managed to hold together. But even Marissa knew the storm wasn't going to let them win easily. Minutes passed like hours, but Marissa remained at the command center, watching every move. She couldn't hear the roar of the engines anymore, but she could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. Suddenly, a new communication came through the radio. The voice of Major Daniel strained but clear. Charleston Tower, this is Thunder 7. We're approaching the landing zone. Wind gusts are at 70 knots, but we've found a safe spot to land. Preparing for descent. The words hit Marissa like a rush of cold air. They were almost there. The next few minutes would determine everything. The entire team waited with bated breath as Marissa worked furiously to coordinate with the ground team. This had to be perfect. As the plane descended toward the landing zone, the wind howled like a banshee, but Major Daniel kept control. The plane rocked under the force of the storm, but the crew held steady. Marissa watched the radar, waiting for the signal that the aircraft had touched down. Charleston Tower, Thunder 7, we've landed. The cargo is safe. We made it through. The words, finally spoken, were like a wave crashing over Marissa. She had done it. The mission had been completed. Lives had been saved. But as she exhaled, she knew the battle wasn't over. The storm outside had calmed, but the storm within the military was just beginning. Marissa had exposed the cracks, but now she would have to face the consequences. The relief of hearing Major Daniel's voice crack through the radio was brief. For a moment, it felt like the storm had subsided, but in reality, it was only a temporary calm before the real storm hit. The successful landing was just the first step. Now, Marissa had to deal with the fallout. The C-17 had made it to the ground, and the personnel and tanks were safe, but Marissa knew the true cost of getting them there. The maintenance issues, the systemic failures, the cover-ups, those were all waiting to be addressed. The military's next move would determine whether those lives had truly been saved or if they were just part of a bigger problem waiting to unravel. Marissa sat in the command center, watching the storm clouds slowly clear outside, the sun finally beginning to break through. It seemed almost symbolic, like the calm before reckoning. General Hayes entered the room, her face tense, but there was a flicker of something like respect in her eyes. "We did it," she said quietly, though the weight of the situation still hung heavily on her shoulders. "The personnel are safe. The equipment's intact." Marissa nodded, though her gaze remained fixed on the radar. "But we both know this isn't over." General Hayes let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her decision was finally taking its toll. "I try to buy us time, but now we've exposed everything. I don't know how we can cover it up anymore." "You can't cover it up," Marissa said, her voice sharp. And you shouldn't try. This is bigger than any one mission. It's about fixing the system. If you want to prevent more lives from being lost, you have to take responsibility for what's been happening behind closed doors. The silence that followed was heavy. General Hayes stood still, processing Marissa's words before nodding slowly. You're right, but we're going to need a hell of a lot more than a report to make this go away. And I can't promise you there won't be consequences. I'm not worried about the consequences anymore, Marissa replied, her voice steady, her eyes locked on General Hayes. I've already lost everything once. I'm not going to lose any more lives because of the same mistakes. We fix it now, or the storm outside will be the least of our problems. General Hayes remained silent for a long moment before speaking again, her voice tight but resolute. I'll take it to the top, but we both know this won't be easy. People will want to protect their careers, and the higher-ups, they'll do whatever it takes to protect their image. Marissa's eyes narrowed. That's exactly the problem. People care more about their image than they do about the people they're supposed to protect. I'll expose this until the truth gets through. It's time for them to face what they've been covering up. With that, General Hayes nodded, her expression serious. I'll have the report delivered to the highest level. I can't promise we'll be able to do anything immediately, but we'll start the process. As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at Marissa. You've done more than I ever expected, and I won't forget it. Marissa didn't respond, her thoughts already racing ahead. She had done her part. Now the real work was just beginning. The road to change was never easy, especially in a system as entrenched as the military. But if she had to burn every bridge to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again, then so be it. The next few days were a blur of meetings, briefings, and strategic decisions. Marissa continued her work, inspecting the planes, making sure that every issue was logged and every repair was done. She also worked with Sergeant Alex and the rest of the engineering team to double-check everything. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. But the whispers had already started. Marissa could feel the tension building around her. People weren't just upset about the grounding of the aircraft. They were angry. Angry at her for exposing the cracks in the system, for making them face the uncomfortable truth that had been hidden for too long. By the end of the week, the military's internal investigation had begun. Marissa was called in for questioning, a formal interrogation that was more about protecting the chain of command than seeking the truth. The higher-ups were nervous, but they had no choice but to follow through. The storm had already broken, and now it was a matter of damage control. As she walked into the room, the familiar faces of officers and investigators were seated at a long table. General Hayes was at the far end, her face unreadable. Marissa took a seat, her posture straight and confident. She knew what was coming. Marissa, the lead investigator began, his voice cold and formal. You've exposed some serious issues within our fleet's maintenance records. We need to know why you waited until the last minute to bring this to light. Marissa didn't flinch, because I couldn't risk more lives. I've seen firsthand what happens when these issues are ignored. I've lost someone because of it. I won't let that happen again. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. General Hayes's gaze remained fixed on her, a mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. The investigator shifted in his chair. You're saying that the deaths of David Thompson and others were due to systemic negligence? Marissa didn't hesitate. Yes, it's all there in the maintenance logs. The equipment was being cleared for flight despite serious faults. Those lives were sacrificed for the sake of meeting quotas and deadlines. The investigator scribbled something down, his pen moving quickly across the paper. And you're prepared to stand by these claims? I'll stand by them until the truth comes out, Marissa replied firmly. And I'll make sure it does. For the next hour, they pressed her, tried to twist her words, but Marissa didn't back down. She knew what the consequences would be for her, but the lives of those who would follow in her footsteps mattered more than her own. When the questioning was over, Marissa was escorted out of the room. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Days passed, and the tension in the air felt like a storm that refused to break. Marissa had made her stand, and now it was time to see the consequences. The military's investigation was underway, but she knew better than to expect quick results. The higher-ups were already scrambling to protect their own, and every piece of evidence she had uncovered was being scrutinized under a microscope. She wasn't naive. She knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't backing down. Her days were filled with more briefings, more reports, and more questions. The press had caught wind of the situation, and though the military had done its best to keep it under wraps, whispers began to spread. Soon, Marissa was being contacted by reporters, asking for her side of the story. But she kept silent. There was no point in speaking to the press when the real battle was inside the walls of the military itself. Then, one afternoon, the call came. It was from General Hayes. "Marissa," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of the situation. "I've just received a direct order from the top. They want to offer you a deal." Marissa's stomach churned. She already knew what this was. They had probably realized they couldn't hide the truth any longer, and now they were trying to make it go away with a well-placed offer. "What kind of deal?" Marissa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "They're offering you a promotion, a high-ranking position with a significant pay raise. They want you to back off the investigation, keep quiet about everything you've uncovered, and just let it go. If you do that, they'll make sure you're taken care of." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Marissa almost allowed herself to picture it. The luxury, the respect, the power. But it didn't last long. She knew the truth. The truth was more important than any reward they could offer her. "I'm not interested in their deal," she said firmly. "I've already lost too much to let this go. They can't buy my silence." General Hayes sighed on the other end of the line. "I thought you'd say that. But you should know, this is bigger than just you now. If you keep pushing, they're going to come for you. And they won't stop. You'll lose everything, Marissa." "I've already lost everything," she replied. "And I'll keep pushing. The truth needs to come out, and I'm not the only one who's been affected by this system. The lives that were lost, they deserve justice." There was a moment of silence. General Hayes seemed to be processing what Marissa was saying, and for a brief second, Marissa thought she might have reached her. But when she spoke again, General Hayes's voice was resigned. "You've made your choice," she said softly. "I can't protect you if you go down this road. But know that I'm doing everything I can on my end to make sure the truth gets out." "Thank you," Marissa said, though she knew General Hayes couldn't do much more. The military was a machine, and sometimes even the most well-meaning people couldn't change the way it worked. The days turned into weeks, and the investigation continued. Slowly but surely, the military began to unravel. The higher-ups, in their attempts to save face, made more mistakes, rushing to cover their tracks, firing those who were too close to the truth, and manipulating reports to suit their narrative. But Marissa had kept her part of the bargain. She wasn't backing down. She continued to work, continuing the fight for those who had been silenced, for the families of those who had died because of systemic failures. And then, one morning, everything changed. The military released a public statement, acknowledging the systemic issues Marissa had exposed. They admitted to the failures in the maintenance records, the negligence that had led to the deaths of David and others, and the poor safety standards that had put countless lives at risk. The news came as a shock, not just to the military, but to the world. But the statement wasn't enough. Marissa knew that this was just the beginning. There were still people within the military who would try to downplay the truth, sweep it under the rug. That's when Marissa took the next step. She walked into the public office of Major Daniel, the same man who had initially laughed when she offered to fly the C-17 through the storm. He had been part of the operation, part of the crew that had nearly flown those planes into the heart of the hurricane. He had, unknowingly, been part of the very system that had let it all happen. Marissa placed a thick stack of documents on his desk, official reports, witness statements, and maintenance logs. Everything they had uncovered. Everything that proved beyond a doubt that what happened was not an accident. It was murder by negligence. "Do you want to be part of the solution?" she asked him, her voice calm, but with the undeniable weight of someone who had carried the truth for far too long. "Or do you want to be part of the problem?" Major Daniel looked at her, his face a mixture of guilt and confusion. He opened the stack of documents, scanning the first few pages. His face grew pale. "I never knew," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. How could I have missed all of this? Because they wanted you to, Marissa replied. They wanted all of you to miss it. But now it's time to make it right. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marissa had done it. She had exposed the truth, and now she was giving Major Daniel a chance to choose. A chance to stand up, to fight for justice and accountability. It was up to him whether he would take it. But as Marissa turned and walked out of the room, she knew the battle was far from over. She had started something much bigger than herself. It was a fight that would continue long after she had made her stand. And the truth, no matter how hard they tried to bury it, would never be silenced again.